I'd like to welcome to the JPP Jewish Philanthropy podcast, Elizabeth Abel. Elizabeth, that's a great last name, by the way, for soliciting funds for many things in life. Elizabeth is a thought leader in philanthropy and an expert in fundraising, and that's why she's here. She has led capital campaigns and development initiatives that have collectively raised nearly $1 billion, wow, for $1 billion for education, healthcare, arts and culture, and advocacy organizations. And she's not like in her 70s either. She's accomplished this at a relatively young age. She's a senior vice president at CCS Fundraising, a global fundraising consulting firm to non-for-profits. She joined CCS in 2013. Elizabeth has partnered with institutions to plan and implement multi-million to billion-dollar campaigns. She also provides counsel on strategic planning, major gift fundraising, board engagement, and a whole array of other, important things in the space. She's also an instructor at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, which has been in the news of late, where she teaches a fundraising course to graduate students in a not-for-profit leadership program. She serves on various boards, so on and so forth. She lives in New York with her husband and their two daughters. I don't know if that's changed since I grabbed this bio, but her two daughters. And she's an avid hiker and a tea drinker. Maybe we'll explore that too. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Okay, cool. So I always start off just basically asking my guests to share with our audience who they are in their own words.
So I am, in my own words, a leader in the philanthropic community. I'm a philanthropy expert, a fundraising consultant, a university instructor, and a wife and mother. And all of these various parts of my identity have both shaped my career and the work that I've done in the philanthropic space.
Fascinating. So I come to the world of philanthropy from a very different space in the sense that I didn't grow up, let's say, like wanting to become like a fundraiser. That wasn't like at all on my radar. I'm curious what your experience is. I don't know people who like aspire to come into the space like a priori, but maybe I don't know everybody in the world. I'm curious what your experience is.
You know, it's funny. I am often asked this question, and I look back, 10, 15 years ago. If you were to have told me that I would work in philanthropy, I don't think I would have understood what that meant and what career opportunities were available to someone interested in social impact or nonprofit work. I always knew that I wanted to work in the nonprofit space. I was influenced particularly by our family's connection to the Holocaust. We had many family members that were killed from as young as 11 years old and throughout our family. And so I grew up with a deep connection to my Jewish identity, which ultimately influenced my interest in the nonprofit sector. I studied Holocaust and genocide education and international relations in undergrad, and that solidified my academic focus in this space. So then the question for me after college became, what next? I knew I wanted to do good, to make an impact, but I wasn't sure in what capacity. So I decided to hold off on entering the professional job market and got my master's degree in nonprofit leadership.
Okay.
It was actually at the University of Pennsylvania, where I now teach a fundraising course. And as part of your core curriculum, you have to take a course on philanthropy. I was honestly not excited for it. I always thought of fundraising as dialing for dollars, and it felt pretty laborious. And my professor, Eileen Heisman, who has been the CEO of the National Philanthropic Trust for several decades, was my first exposure to philanthropy, and she absolutely changed the way in which I thought about this work. The idea that philanthropy is just dialing for dollars was immediately transformed to recognize the role that philanthropy plays in supporting mission-driven organizations, and particularly major gifts philanthropy. So these transformational investments that can shape an organization's trajectory. And so that was my aha moment where I knew that this is what I wanted to do. So I've been in my current role for about 11 years and have had the privilege of working with many nonprofits on fundraising projects.
Interesting. Where did you go to undergrad?
I went to Tufts University up in Boston, which is funny enough where I met my husband.
Oh, wow. Okay. Small world. Interesting. So tell me a little bit just about your family. You mentioned Holocaust connection, just kind of what was your like affiliation growing up, or just your perspective on the Jewish community, and maybe even through college, kind of like what were your observations?
So I grew up in a family of very strong Jewish women, multi-generations of strong Jewish women, and women who are connected to each other and to our family members that were no longer living. And so my grandmother is one of four, and twice a year for Hanukkah and Passover, all four, you know, lineages, if you will, would get together. And we always made a point not only of celebrating the holidays, but of remembering our past, because we believe that our past informs our present and guides us into the future. And so for me, it was always, Judaism was always family and tzedakah and social action and trying to do what we could to make the world a better place. And so infused in that was like Jewish traditions and joy. And my mother would always bake challah with my sister and I every Friday morning. Now it's something that I do with my daughters, and we still do with my mother when all of us are together.
Oh,
But so I would say that it's the values that have really been deeply ingrained in me are values of family and like Jewish culture and traditions, and the joy that all of those things can bring and how they enrich your life and the life of others that you meet along the way.
interesting. Very, very interesting. Uh, I'm curious, just like little jumping ahead a little bit, but well, before I even get there, let's I just did you see transformational giving kind of in your upbringing? Like, I don't know, like if you went to synagogue or any in any like any context, school, like what you saw kind of like philanthropy expressed kind of as you were like in your younger years growing up? Was that something you were cognizant of?
It was, and in different ways. You know, my sister, for her bat mitzvah project, I have a younger sister. She had a friend who was diagnosed with cancer, and like, thank God she's okay. But for her bat mitzvah project, she decided she was going to raise money for Relay for Life, which is a program through the American Cancer Society. And what started out as a bat mitzvah project turned into like a 10-year commitment. And she ultimately started a Relay for Life in our hometown in Westchester County, which has to date raised more than $1 million for American Cancer Society. My mother was always involved in volunteer leadership roles, and I started to get involved in Jewish youth groups when I was in high school, and philanthropy is a core Jewish value, giving back to our communities. So it's just felt natural for me. The word philanthropy is derived from the Greek word philos and anthropos, which means love for humankind. And it just feels like it's not only derived from Greek vocabulary, but very much a core Jewish value that we live every day.
It's funny, when I used to like very early on, thank God we've released over 100 episodes of my podcast now, but like 5 years ago when we launched, so I used to like in my pitch to guests, I used to use that like definition of philanthropy and the philos. This is interesting. It's reminded me of that. It's been
Yeah.
it's been a while. Did you ever think like, okay, all these values are amazing, but like maybe I should be the philanthropist instead of being the facilitator? We put a lot of emphasis on the people that actually make these transformational gifts. I think less emphasis, although we have on our podcast, on the people who facilitate those gifts. You want to speak a little bit to the dynamic of that relationship? I guess I asked two questions there, like what's exciting about being on one side versus the other, and what's the dynamic being in the role that you are in terms of the role you get to play to either coach others or facilitate gifts. I love to hear.
Yeah, so I love the role that I'm in. I think it's really energizing and also fulfilling to be able to work with nonprofit leaders and development teams to put together the strategy and pitch essentially to engage major funders. And then for those major funders to feel like they can play a meaningful difference in the future trajectory of an organization through their philanthropy. So it's in a way like a little bit of matchmaking in the sense, not fostering the connection between the two people, but helping them like build alignment around a shared vision and goal. And when those gifts come in, and sometimes they come in quickly, and other times they could take years to come to fruition. they're so fulfilling, and it's really exciting to see the impact that philanthropy can have. And so I appreciate the role that I play because I have the opportunity to work closely with executive leadership and to also interview philanthropists through feasibility and campaign planning studies and understand what's on their mind or what motivates them to make gifts, or how do they prioritize an organization philanthropically, or opportunities to engage multi-generations in their philanthropy. So it's energizing, the role that I'm in. And I also don't take it for granted because I think it's a really meaningful role to play in the facilitation of gifts to nonprofits that are doing great work.
Well, what do you think are the necessary skills to be effective in the role that you play? I want to ask you personally, like what skills you think you possess, but like what do you think broadly are like the most critical? And again, there's different strokes for different folks, right? Like there's probably a lot of different ways to skin a cat. There are a lot of different ways to kind of approach uh, different prospects. But what do you think are some of the core traits that you find that people in your space possess that are most effective in what they do?
I think it's really about relationship building. And so at the heart of relationship building is having a strong emotional intelligence, being able to see and listen and hear what inspires people and what motivates them or what might not. And then being able to project manage as well. So, I think about major donor timelines, for example. We want to solicit a family in Q4 of this year. What needs to happen to prepare them and to begin to socialize the campaign vision and educate them on the impact of philanthropy? And how do we work backwards from Q4 of this year to accomplish all of those things? What materials do we need? Who needs to be making the ask or in the room? What volunteer leaders or board members can we leverage? And so there's real strategic planning that goes into securing each and every one of these gifts. So I think on the external facing side, you need to be kind of very thoughtful and self-aware and a strong communicator. And then on the internal side, a real strategist, a strong project manager, and the ability to, see the puzzle complete and also put the pieces together at the same time.
This is like really high level, like from my perspective, sophisticated fundraising. There's really all, and that's great, and all the credit to you. But frankly, there are all different types of people in this space who, maybe aren't as thought out and maybe have a tremendous amount of pressure to kind of, produce results quickly. And if I'm understanding correctly, you kind of are more in the, I guess you're more in the, I don't know if you've worn, like you've actually worked for, I would like, I think you've temporarily interim roles in organizations, but you're more kind of a consultant type of role. But what would you say in terms of people that, I mean, I think the answer would be everybody should do what you're saying, right? But practically, there's different levels of organizations and different levels of sophistication. So I'm curious, kind of how would you translate, let's say on the most minimalistic level or least level of sophistication, kind of effective traits or things you just have to have, like bottom line, like even if you don't have the ability to kind of be as strategic as you're describing.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally you need to be able to make the case for support for your organization and to tell the story of where you've been, what your challenges are, the role of philanthropy, and how you'll get to where you're going. And essentially, like, what's your story and what's the role of philanthropy in shaping that story? And so that's a skill that I think everyone can build, practicing your pitch, writing it down, workshopping it with colleagues. But I think that's ultimately both, how you make your pitch verbally and how you write it in solicitation appeals or proposals. That's a critical skill that I think everyone can master.
I hear. What do you think is the hardest part or most challenging part of the role that you play or the people that are in the space?
I think it's time. I think nonprofit leaders and development professionals have ambitious fundraising goals that increase every year. They have competing priorities, and it's really tough to find the time to get through your pipeline, to make all of your asks, and then, of course, to thank donors. But I think there are ways to leverage your board to help and to, build strong teams and delegate. But I think for me personally, it's time. I feel like I'm always running up against not enough hours in the day or too many things on my to-do list. And
Fascinating. Wow. I'm curious, we've all been very profoundly impacted by October 7th. Uh, some of us more closely, some of us, further away. But I think every Jewish person, and certainly even every good human being in the world, has hopefully been touched and affected and impacted by you know evil being unleashed in such a powerful way, and obviously a lot of people taking sides on different sides of issues. But I'm curious to hear, just from your perspective, kind of uh, where were you on October 7th? How did you find out about unfolding events? What has your relationship with Israel been kind of previously, post, and just how it affects kind of the whole. I think I read that you've done a lot of been very helpful in this space, particularly over the last few months. So please share with us a lot about that. Would be great.
yeah, it is hard to quantify the impact that October 7th has had on the world, and on our family and me personally. I was about 4 months postpartum with my second daughter. I was home by myself with her all day, reading the news, and it was awful. It was probably the hardest time I've ever had, because I look at my children, and of course I see the children that were murdered on October 7th. It's hard not to, as a Jewish woman and a mother. I'm a very action-oriented person. And so when I came back to work from parental leave, I really appreciated the opportunity to partner with a number of nonprofits making a tremendous difference in combating anti-Semitism and supporting healthcare in Israel and preserving Jewish life and culture. And so that helped me focus my grief, my rage, my emotional response to all that happened on October 7th and the October 8th world that we're living in still.
Hmm.
Um, what's been inspiring to me has been the philanthropic response from the Jewish community. I think we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars raised through synagogues, through Jewish federations, through emergency response campaigns for Israel. And I think that speaks to the resiliency and strength and unity of the Jewish community in a really challenging time. And it's been an honor to be a part of many of the campaigns that I've been a part of, not just professionally, but deeply personally as well.
How does one, it's kind of a twofold question. How do you differentiate, meaning I'm a donor, right? Certainly, the needs are great. The asks have been, never ceasing, frankly, uh, for needs. And there's just two silly examples of my own, like very like minor examples. I was in Israel before Passover, and I met a bunch of soldiers down south, and one of them solicited me to help, and how could I not? But now he keeps WhatsApping me like over and over, like every few weeks, for more and more money. Or like I have a cousin who's on the front lines, who was up north and now he's in Gaza, and his unit needs more drones, and like it's like 14,000 a pop, and so on and so forth. I mean, and I'm sure we're all kind of getting inundated with these kind of, we'll call them personal requests, and there's communal requests, and so many great organizations doing so many things. I don't, I mean, it's like a twofold question. I don't know professionally kind of how you decide kind of where do you invest uh, your limited resources in terms of who you're going to work with and who you're not going to work with. And how do we kind of, as call it consumers, I don't know if that's the right word, but how do we kind of uh, assess kind of a hierarchy of like, and it's obviously a personalized question, but still, like, how do you kind of how do you conceptualize, like, how do people, or strategy for people to maybe within the framework of who we all are individually, kind of how to approach, or how to look at when you're just getting hit by all sides. They're all connected to Israel, they're all pressing, but like, just what do you do?
It's a tough question. And I think it's something that we're hearing people across all socioeconomic spheres ask, is how do I prioritize my philanthropy when the needs are so great across the board? What we know is that Americans are very generous, especially in challenging times. We know that the stock market has been performing favorably, that personal disposable income has increased. But what is hard is when you're faced with, 3, 4, 10 plus asks, where do you give money to? And I remember a few years ago, I had a Harusa regularly, and we actually covered philanthropy. And I had this question of, if you have $1,000, where do you give it? Do you give $1,000 to one organization, or do you give $1 to 1,000 organizations? And in my work, I feel like I focus on the $1,000 to one organization. And my hypothesis was that you can make a deeper impact with a greater amount of money.
Right.
And what I learned is that the Torah actually says the opposite, that you can have like a greater breadth of impact if you give $1 to 1,000 people, because each of those people will do something with that dollar and have a greater impact with that dollar. Different perspectives, but I think it really got me thinking. And to your question, maybe you give $18 to 5 organizations that are doing 5 different things, but they're all really important to you. Or maybe you give $18,000 to one organization that's having a very meaningful impact in your local community. I think there's no right or wrong, and that's the beauty of philanthropy. You give in ways that resonate with you, and other people will complement how you give. And I think that's really inspiring.
I hear that. Yeah. And in my own work, kind of, working with individuals, I've come across both, right? I've come across people that happy to diversify. And even if the impact is, at least quantitatively not as great. And there are other people who you see are very, very strategic and like to say, you're doing great work, but it doesn't fit into like my priorities, type of thing. So no, I definitely appreciate that. I'll just add, I think what you're alluding to in terms of giving more, I think is from Maimonides. And part of the concept also is to build us into givers, in the sense that if you're constantly giving, right, that it's a beautiful way to create. I would like to tell the story that when I was in my 20s, so I was dating a young lady very seriously who I ended up not marrying. But I remember we were once at a hockey game, and I had just started my first job as an attorney, and I had a job in a big law firm. And she said to me, how are you going to give your charity? And I was kind of like, it was like an interesting question because I never really made money before. So it wasn't really something that I really thought about. And it was a really fascinating question. Like, for the first time, when you get to kind of decide, let's say, how you're going to, if a person, let's say, gives, if they tithe, if they give maaser, if they give a tenth of their earnings, let's say, so you almost like strategically, you get to like kind of decide how you're going to disperse those resources. And it was a very interesting question, a very challenging question. And obviously it changes over time, and there are different clauses that come and different clauses that go. But it's actually like an interesting, so thank you for sharing that dichotomy, but I think it's an important one. I'm curious just to ask, because like somebody in the space, somebody was asking me this recently, and I always like to hear. I'd love to hear if you're willing to share kind of maybe like a terrible fundraising debacle, something that was just like disastrous, didn't go the way you had planned, had hoped, and love to hear like a great success, like maybe the largest gift you ever played a role in soliciting. Love to hear those sides if you're willing to share.
Sure. I have to think about the debacle. What I will say though, I'll start with like the challenge. I think there's this misconception in philanthropy and major donor philanthropy. If you ask for a gift and the donor says yes, then you ask for a gift that's too low. So let's say I ask you for $100,000 over 5 years. You say, yes, that sounds great. I think there's this feeling of, oh, I should have asked for more. And I don't like that theory personally. I think fundraising is really about relationship building in the long game, and every gift is, meaningful in and of itself. And that first $100,000 gift could lead to another gift later on. But I think just because someone says yes right away in those experiences, when it does not mean you asked for too little. And I think that's a message that I'm trying to communicate regularly with my client partners. In terms of a success story, there's one donor that I interviewed a few years ago for a feasibility study, a high net worth individual that had made large gifts to other institutions, but kind of more modest sized gifts to the organization that I was working with at the time. And I remember I was a little nervous to interview this person just because of the caliber of their philanthropy. It was out of state. I traveled by myself. It was a really meaningful conversation. And I learned that there were a few factors that signaled to me that they were interested in giving more. And so I went back, I kind of wrote up my report, and over the next 12 months, developed a strategy and series of activities to meaningfully engage this family in the organization. And we ended up increasing their gift by 5x. And it was just really meaningful because it was the first time I saw the donor journey experience come to life, from that first initial interview to, conversations with the executive director, proposal, questions and follow up, and then the gift agreement. And it was, in some ways like a very textbook cultivate, brief, solicit, steward. Um, but in other ways, I don't take it for granted. I think we were really intentional about how we made the case for support and how we could demonstrate the impact of their multi-year investment. And it was exciting. It was one of my first big gifts in my career, and it was one of the largest gifts the organization's ever received.
Interesting. So this is in the context of you were helping a client uh,
Correct.
raise the level of a gift.
Yeah.
Right. Do you find that, I mean, it's interesting to me, do a lot of organizations hire like consultants like to help?
Very much so. Yeah. So often they hire consultants when they are planning for or embarking on a larger capital endowment or comprehensive campaign that's above and beyond an annual campaign. There's a certain level of expertise that's beneficial when thinking about these big, major 6, 7, 8, and sometimes 9-figure gifts.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it's not simple. I think a lot of the frustration for people who aren't as successful is probably because they're not going about it the right way. Or they don't have the time, or they're not really listening to the prospects and understanding kind of more comprehensively why they're giving large gifts to A, B, or C and not to D, and what needs to be what gaps need to be bridged to bring up organization D to the levels of A, B, and C, so on and so forth. There's also you see I've heard this a lot. Like, you see they're capable, you see that, why are they giving so much over there and not over here, right? Like, because everybody assumes their organization is hopefully great,
Yeah.
serving up support, right? But it's much more complicated than that. And how do we go about understanding kind of like what is it, like what is making X, Y, and Z happen? So that's very interesting, fascinating. I don't, you mentioned that a little bit at the beginning. You mentioned one of your mentors who kind of I think you mentioned in graduate school, kind of a professor who kind of shifted your whole focus to what philanthropy is. I'd love to just hear a little bit about some of the other people that inspire, motivate, impact you on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I think it's important generally to have mentors in all aspects of your life, personally and professionally. So I think in my professional role, there have been a few women who have been advocates and colleagues and thought partners who I've learned from throughout the years. And then professionally, I think personally, I think it's honestly my mom. She's been my greatest champion since I was little. She instilled confidence in me, and that happened at a very young age. Um, and it always made me feel supported, and I could always go to her with big or small questions or just to talk. And it made me feel valued and like my perspectives matter. And I think as a young woman, it's really hard sometimes to have confidence. I know that's sometimes the greatest struggle that many people face generally, and especially in fundraising when you're asking people for money. So that's been a big lesson learned along the way, is confidence and the importance of trusting yourself. And then at my own company, I've had mentors, and I always appreciate mentors that are, 2 steps ahead of me in their careers or about 10 years older than me, because it's like we're not competing with one another, but there's enough space that I can really learn from them and also feel like there's room for me to grow under their leadership and guidance.
I love that. By the way, I want to push you on that a little more to elaborate because it's something I talk a lot with people about mentorship, and particularly in a corporate type of setting where, it's delicate, right? Like you don't want to get too close to people you work with, especially if they're your superiors, because that could potentially be detrimental at times. How do you go about kind of you gave some good criteria in terms of an age gap, in terms of trying to make sure there isn't, let's say, a direct competitive, a reason why that person maybe not be the best mentor. Uh, but how have you seen it? I've actually, I've spoken to people who, that they put a very high premium in selecting jobs, if there's going to be good mentorship versus if there's not. I've heard a lot of people have had miserable experiences, just like they're on their own and nobody cares about them and nobody invests in them. What are your thoughts just in terms of broadening that advice, guidance for, obviously, probably, like you said, mentors at your place of work, mentors outside, but what are some lessons or guides you've just had in your experiences with good mentors, or maybe mentors that were disappointing?
Yeah, so I've always self-selected my mentors. I've participated in mentorship programs where mentors were selected for me, and it's like never been the right fit.
Mhm.
Because I know myself really well and I know what I need and want. And I often find that that's something that I seek out specifically in other people. So I have a mentor that, is someone that I work with and I've worked with for a very, very long time. And she's a working mother. I have a mentor that is more like a Jewish thought leader, and we talk about more philosophical concepts that apply to life. I have a mentor from Penn, and then I have an executive coach. And I think, the executive coach is like a paid professional development opportunity, but that's also been indispensable for me as well.
Why is that important? Why is that important, that angle of it? Because just to,
Yeah, so I think the executive coach complements mentorship because it's really tactical skill building, and it's also very specific career growth opportunities. It's someone that I,
they're investing in you, and
yeah, exactly.
right.
The mentorship, I think, is more like thought partnership or, navigating certain situations or learning from someone, where to me, coaching is very like action oriented.
Hmm. Fascinating. What are some of the like best takeaways you had from that experience?
That you are your greatest self advocate. And it's important to really understand what's valued at your company and then kind of focus on that. I think there was a time in my career where I was trying to accomplish a lot. And I remember meeting with my executive coach, and she was like, wow, this is awesome. And I actually don't think these things matter. I think they're great if you enjoy them, but I don't think they matter to your career goals in the way that you think they do. And I remember that was such a pivotal moment for me because it started to give me permission to say no to things. And I think, I know particularly as a woman, it's really hard to say no. I feel like I don't want to come across as cold or not collaborative. But my time is just so valuable. And if I say yes to something, it means I can't do, another project, or I have to miss dinner with my kids. And so I've created a little rubric for myself when I'm asked to do things, what's the value for me and my time. And it's been really helpful. It's allowed me to sharpen my focus on the things that do matter and say no to the things that, while they may be exciting or important, they're not necessarily a priority.
Very, very interesting. My wife is the mother of six, and she has a very busy career. And we often, I'm going to share this with her actually, even before we launch this episode, because we were just talking about this last night. Like sometimes when you're asked to do certain things in the work context, that whatever reason it doesn't sit well with you, and like trying to understand why is that? Like it sounds like you have a good framework for like kind of, what, does this make sense or does this not make sense, and kind of how to kind of gently or delicately kind of punt on those on those uh on those things. I don't know if I can ask you this, like what like where are you trying to get to kind of in this space, or kind of like what is the vision or what's the dream? from where you are now to where you kind of want to go. We said, I think 36 under 36. So I think that means let's look out for you guys because you're going to be doing big things. So what are some of the things that you're thinking about?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things I'm thinking about. Right now, and again, since October 7th, my priority has been my family and supporting nonprofit organizations through my work in philanthropy that are meaningful to me and to the Jewish community. Um, and right now, that's enough.
Okay, good answer. I like that. Okay. How do how do you decide at the end of the day? Let's talk personal. We don't have to talk professional so much. Like, how do you kind of go about allocating your time and your resources in terms of when you're solicited? How do you and your family kind of assess kind of what are your key priorities and what are important but can't support everything? How do you kind of go about that process? And it could be how do time, spirituality, professional, family. These are all valuable insights, I think, for all of us. We're always, trying to balance. So I'd love to hear kind of your tricks of the trade. Uh, how do you go about that?
Sure. So, I'll start by saying my husband and I met each other when we were 18. So we've grown up together, we've built careers together, and we make decisions financially together. So when we think about philanthropy, what's important to us first and foremost are the Jewish institutions that have positively impact our life. So our rabbis organization we support, in particular, some Jewish advocacy organizations, and then academic institutions. Those are really the two primary focus for us. Our children are young right now, but my 4-year-old knows what philanthropy means. Very basic, but she knows it means love for everyone. And when I tell her I have to go to work, she says, "Are you doing philanthropy?" And it's not lost on me that my 4-year-old understands what this means. And so for us, what's really important is thinking about how to engage our children in philanthropy and to teach them what it means.
It
Um,
remind me, I have a cousin who is very involved in the stock market. So when his kids were little, they would always like say, "Daddy, how did your stocks do today?" Like what that meant. But like,
yeah.
you're sad. Did your stocks not do well today? Like,
Oh. Um, I would say in terms of time, I serve on 2 boards at a time. I don't like to serve on more than 2 boards because I feel like I'm pulled in too many directions and I want to be meaningfully involved in the boards that I serve on. So right now I serve on a board for my graduate program, and I serve on a board for a fundraising association in Manhattan.
okay.
And then how I organize my time really ebbs and flows. I'm one of these people that lives and breathes by my color-coded calendar.
Okay.
And I find that, having a good game plan for the week allows me to be present when I need to be present, and at work when I'm at work, and with my family when I'm with my family. And I think the greatest piece of advice that I can give to others is to figure out what works for you and then to communicate that to the people that you work with.
Mhm. Interesting. I'm gonna ask just a few questions just as we wind down. So first of all, you mentioned boards, serving on boards. I'm curious. I'd love to hear a little more about your feeling, both as an insider and an outsider, kind of about the functionality of boards, the effectiveness of boards, kind of the necessity to have a board or not to have a board, even for different not-for-profits. Um, what's your sense about the importance and the value and how to cultivate really great boards? I've been involved with too many organizations over the years where unfortunately they may have a board in name but it's the board is not active or the board is not engaged. I'm curious some thoughts about that.
I think boards are one of the greatest assets in fundraising, and board members bring such a breadth of talent and perspective and expertise, and of course, philanthropic support. The question becomes, how do you engage and then activate your board members as fundraising ambassadors? And I think some organizations do it really well, and then there's opportunities to build a stronger culture of philanthropy on boards too.
Mhm. Okay. And you obviously work with a lot of high net worth individuals as well. Kind of what's some of the feedback that you find yourself hearing uh, from them in terms of what's important to them or like what bothers them in terms of uh, being solicited probably so frequently. What have you gleaned kind of people that aren't doing it the right way? What are some of the insights that you've gleaned in that in those conversations?
I think it's about consistent and regular communications with donors and sharing with them stories that illustrate the impact of their philanthropy, inviting them to events to see their philanthropy in action, or picking up the phone and thanking them or wishing them a happy holiday when it's the right time of year. Those personal touch points make donors feel valued and appreciated, and then motivated to make another financial investment.
Okay, and one final question.
Mhm.
Curious, as somebody who teaches on, a college campus, the one that's been, has been in the news, frankly, for unfortunately anti-Semitic, behavior, from students and things of that nature, and somebody who's obviously spent time on college campuses over the years. What have been your experiences? What are your perspectives, or what are your takeaways from those from what you're observing? Kind of what do you think is going on in that milieu, and kind of what are your hopes or aspirations to kind of see things change, or tide to turn?
I think for me personally, it's just reinvigorated my own commitment to my Jewish identity and to supporting Jewish organizations. I think there's definitely a need for philanthropy to be invested in Jewish campus organizations to support the next generation. Um, but I think it's really about doubling down on our Jewish pride.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me because there are so many, whether it's Chabad on campus, there's so many different organizations that are supporting and strengthening Jewish life on many of the prominent campuses, right? And that's essential and that's critical. And yet, sadly, I was for Passover, I was in Panama with somebody who was a board member on one of these, we'll call it one of these outreach campus organizations, and he was sharing with me like the immense frustration that despite all the resources that they're pouring into campus life, they don't have like immediate response or tools for their students how to kind of, like, running away from campus is not a solution, right? This is not your answer. This is not your area of expertise. I'm just sharing with you. I'm just curious, like, what have you taught this semester? Like, what have you experienced directly, or what are you hearing from students? What's your vibe about like how dire the situation is or isn't?
I honestly like my class is half virtual, so
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah, so I'm on campus to record some content, but we meet over Zoom.
By the way, is that very common nowadays? Like, is that, or that's just
It depends on the program. There's in-person programs, there's virtual. So mine is like a little bit hybrid, but mostly when we meet as a class, it's virtual. So the dynamic has been different, and I'm working with graduate students. So they're at different stages in their lives. So I don't really feel like I can respond to the question. You know what I mean?
yeah. What's the most I actually taught a course this semester for the first time in ages at Yeshiva University. I'm curious, like, what's your experience teaching? How did that come about, and how do you enjoy that, and how does where does that fit into kind of like the work that you do?
I love teaching. It is so energizing. This has been my 6th year doing it. I started out as a teaching assistant, loved it so much that I created a syllabus that I wanted to teach and knocked on the program director's door and was like, let's talk about my syllabus.
Hmm.
And it ended up that there was an opportunity to co-teach with a former professor of mine, and I just really enjoyed it. It's nice to be able to take what I'm doing in my professional role as a consultant and then apply it to an educational setting for an incoming cohort of nonprofit leaders.
Interesting. Do you keep in touch with students? Is that something that you
I
like?
do. Yeah, not everyone.
Yeah, sure.
But there's always a few students each year that reach out or to share news on a job or a gift they've secured. And it's really special to hear that the course that they took was influential in their careers.
Fascinating. Okay, final question. Uh, what's something about Elizabeth Abel that like people wouldn't guess? Something that like I just met you, obviously, so I don't know what, probably a ton of things I wouldn't guess, but like people who know you, even like what's like something that maybe people don't know about you, don't appreciate about you, or don't wouldn't guess about you, other than drinking tea a lot, it sounds like.
I love to be outside and I love to be hiking and on the move. So I feel like to me, if I'm not working, I am out in nature, likely in the American Southwest, likely climbing up some mountain.
Fascinating. Do you try to like get outdoors just during the day, even on the work day, to kind of like
I do. Yeah, I actually love working from home. And the hybrid environment has been,
who does it?
yeah, it's been fabulous for me. So I try and get outside, a few times a day for walks around the neighborhood, hanging out with the family. But yeah, I like to be moving outside.
Amazing. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your insights. Really profound. And keep up the great work, impacting and changing the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much.